Hello, my name is Sophie Westermann, and this is my Honors College Capstone project for Western Washington University. My presentation is titled Across the Ages, Eco-Horror and Our Climate. Chapter 1, Introduction. When you go to the movie theater, you always walk away with a new sense of where you stand in the world. Movies can show us many different walks of life, and we can put ourselves in different people's shoes by watching them. This phenomenon is very common. Think about any movie that you have seen recently and how it made you feel. Maybe you watched Batman or Superman, and now you feel inspired that you can be a hero in your own story. Maybe you watched Hidden Figures and were inspired to believe that anyone can make a change despite many obstacles. Maybe you even watched Jurassic Park and came away with an irrational fear that a dinosaur would eat you, which totally did not happen to me as a kid. My point is, movies make you feel things. Movies make you see the world in a different light. People are inspired when they watch inspiring movies. People are scared when they watch scary movies. My question is, do scary movies inspire change? For example, after watching a horror movie, you might check that all your doors and windows are locked. Maybe you keep the lights on at night, and maybe you feel super jumpy or on edge. How can a movie inspire people to take actions like these and put them towards a larger cause? For example, climate advocacy. In general, art will reflect different societal issues that are happening over time. In the 1920s and 30s, there were a lot of religious themes and undertones in media that reflected the culture during those times. When we look at disaster or horror movies, a higher power is blamed for the tragedies. For example, in 1933's Deluge, a massacring natural disaster movie that wreaks havoc on society. As we move forward in time, we can see this change reflected in these movies. From my research, I have noticed that the 70s to more modern movies, the capitalism has been the main aggregator in these movies related to disaster and horror. In the 1970s, climate change was beginning to come into the political and public eye. The goal of my project is to analyze how horror and disaster movies reflected societal issues like climate change from the 1970s to now, where global warming has become more and more relevant to the public. In Scott Frear's book, American Disaster Movies of the 1970s, Crisis, Spectacle, and Modernity, he so eloquently reflects on the relationship between disaster movies and us as a society. Humanity cannot confront the horror of mass self-annihilation, so the disaster film is a means, through tragic pleasure, of confronting and containing the Dionysian chaos that threatens to undo the superstructures of high modernity. Whew. Although he was a bit wordy, I think that he gets his and my point across well. As I mentioned before, many of the disaster and horror movies in my research directly correlate to capitalism's deficits and its harm to our climate. To show how nature or natural elements can or have rebelled against humanity and our sins against the planet, we see an increasingly popular genre known as eco-horror. Chapter 2, Mother Nature. As humans, we have our own human-centric view, which may seem obvious, but it causes us to overlook how fragile we really are. The mantra that we have evolved to dominate Mother Nature or play God is too prevalent in our culture. And yes, since the inception of man, over the course of thousands of years, we have gotten to a point in technological advancements like agriculture, infrastructure, and society. But in the grand scheme of things, we are but a tiny blip on Earth's timeline. To add in some fun historical science tidbits, Earth is approximately 4.54 billion years old. Since its formation, and the formation of life many years later, Earth has seen 5 major mass environmental extinctions that killed off greater than 75% of all life each time. All of these extinctions were caused by our environment and its interactions with our hydrosphere, geosphere, biosphere, and atmosphere. And even the impact of the asteroid that took down the dinosaurs was amplified due to these interacting parts. All this to say that Earth has incredibly complex components and history that many people do not understand, and that is clear to see due to the fact that we are causing the 6th mass extinction currently. No, really. Look it up. The current rate of increasing carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere has been unprecedented, and will soon be rivaling previous levels of mass extinction. Anyways, after that lovely reminder, back to my main point. Humans believe that we have conquered Earth, but Mother Nature will always come back to bite us and reclaim what is hers. Whether it's storms, earthquakes, or disease, eco-horror movies remind the viewer of humanity's place in nature, not as its commander, but as a part of the larger whole. You may feel cozy in your brick homes, with your central heating and your processed food, but these movies show us that anything can happen to disrupt our normalized way of life. Chapter 3: Godzilla. Now, I finally get to talk about the movies that I researched. We are starting off with Godzilla, a series that has stood the test of time with 38 movies spanning over 7 decades, with the first movie coming out in 1954 and the most recent in 2023. As I have mentioned earlier, I have noticed strong themes of each era's climate reflected in these movies. Yes, this project is focusing on the phenomena specifically around climate change and global warming, but in order to analyze movie themes further, I want to look back at the movie-making origins. Godzilla is a prime example of this, due to a very large sample size and longitudinal run. The first Godzilla reflects on a post-war Japan and uses monster symbolism to portray the effects of nuclear bombing. As we move forward in time, Godzilla switches back and forth from terrorizing Japan to saving Japan in a versus and insert your kaiju here film. We've got a ton of interesting characters and guest appearances like King Kong, Mothra, Ghidorah, Ibara, Son of Godzilla, Hedorah, Gigan, Megalon, Mechagodzilla, Space Godzilla, and the list goes on. While you can look at many of these movies and just see two men fighting in uncomfortable looking costumes, most films portray a deeper meaning behind them. To hone in on a specific example for my project, we are looking at 1971's Godzilla vs. Hedorah. When Japan had a serious issue with pollution in the 60s and 70s, enter a film about a giant goopy sludge monster, Hedorah, not to be confused with Ghidorah, the three-headed dragon king. In this film, we start off with a dreary Japan that has terribly polluted waters due to the quick industrialization and nuclear bombs. This causes all sea life and plants to die off in the near waters, which are filled with oil, trash, and straight-up gunk. To top it all off, the skies are filled with smog as well. The story starts when a fisherman finds a mysterious black tadpole that seems to be pollution incarnate. Over time, this monster, dubbed Hedorah, eats all of the pollution in the water and grows bigger and bigger until it has evolved into an amphibious form, able to walk on land and start huffing the smoke coming from factory smokestacks. Enter Godzilla as the hero of this story. Over a long battle of arm waving and the same slightly annoying soundbite roar over and over again, you will not believe how many times they played that during the movie. Anyways, Godzilla wins this battle, and Hedorah slinks back into the murky waters. Due to its amphibious nature, towns inland are unbothered by Hedorah's presence, far away from water, symbolic of the "if it doesn't affect me, I don't care" mantra that is ever popular today with climate change. However, it transforms into its final form, a flying jet, symbolic of Japan's military history. This flying form showers bystanders with noxious gas that gives its victims similar effects to radiation poison instantly. After the devastation of the town, people from all over the country protest against industrials and pollution as they prepare for Hedorah to completely destroy Japan. The main characters decide that they want to throw an end-of-the-world party on top of Mount Fuji with funky 70s music and dancing, but guess who decides to crash it? Godzilla and Hedorah, of course. As they are having their epic final battle, one detail I noticed in the film were some older men ominously hiding in a bush, watching it all go down without helping the partygoers who are fighting back. I wanted to point out the symbolism of how older generations have left the world in a worse place for their children and decide to watch the world burn rather than fight back at what they created. In our final battle, Godzilla finally defeats Hedorah. Somehow, though, Godzilla, although goofily, learns to fly. I'll play a quick clip here. Yeah, I think that's the first time and the last time that Godzilla learned to fly in a Godzilla movie. Not sure why, but humanity got to live another day until the next couple dozen Godzilla movies. But the next specific one we are looking at is Shin Godzilla from 2016. Flashing forwards in time, we have another franchise movie, this time with Godzilla as the monster. Shin Godzilla heavily reflects a post-nuclear Japan, both from World War II as well as the Fukushima disaster in 2011. This film tells us a story of a heavily disfigured creature crawling out of the water and creepily dragging itself on shore through the middle of towns. Yeah, this thing was made to creep you out. Starting out in the water, it almost resembles a mutated fish, with a long tail, wide eyes, and gills that bleed profusely as it struggles to breathe on land. Over time, it evolves into a more recognizable Godzilla, forming legs and eventually standing upright as a looming monster. The movie describes how it fed on nuclear waste and can now evolve and mutate at will, leaving an immense trail of radiation wherever it goes. While this creature is definitely horrifying, the true horror behind the story is the Japanese government's response to this tragedy. Unlike our many Godzilla vs. blank kaiju films, this movie is Godzilla vs. bureaucracy. As Godzilla ravages everything in its path, government officials are busy having meetings to decide how to handle the situation. They are all too busy jumping through all of the hoops to actually make a plan to save their citizens. In the movie, the US government decides that they want to step in, and they want to nuke the creature. Talk about adding fuel to a fire. Ultimately, the Japanese government finally comes to a solution and narrowly escapes being nuked again. Although this is a reflection on how the Fukushima disaster was handled, I think this can be widely applied to any government trying to solve major problems, particularly when it comes to my topic of climate change. Chapter 4: Plants, Animals, and Fungi. When we are talking about climate change, we often think about what it affects. Oftentimes, in eco-horror movies, the focus is on how nature, like plants and animals, take back control over their lives from humans. Due to our impact on climate, we are indirectly affecting the ecosystems and environments that millions of living organisms call home, like the melting of the ice caps, warming of oceans that take out coral reefs, or the change of migration patterns. These are all just the effects of the climate. But humans are actively polluting waters and soil, clear-cutting forests, and oil drilling. Over the years, there have been many movies that address these issues through eco-horror. To look specifically at some films, we have many strong themes of pollution taking a toll on creatures who then take revenge on humans. Like I mentioned before, many of the Godzilla movies have had these themes, and now we are taking a look at some more realistic monsters. Some classics include stories about bugs and insects, like 1954's Them, about atomically mutated ants that terrorize the population. In 1977's Empire of Ants, it also tells a tale of ants that ate illegally dumped toxic waste and became giant. 1977 also had Kingdom of the Spiders, where pesticides killed off their food source and so they started aiming for larger food, aka humans. Are you beginning to notice a theme here? Anyways, I'm going to zone in on two specific films that talk about the animals taking back control. 1972's Frogs and 2012's The Bay. Frogs is set in a polluted southern swamp and is focused around a wildlife photographer, a young Sam Elliott before the famous mustache, who crosses paths with a wealthy family who owns a mansion on an island in the swamp. The family is visiting their uber-rich grandfather for his birthday and the 4th of July, who got all of his wealth off of the land. This sets up a dichotomy between the ecologist and the capitalist, who butt heads throughout the film. As time goes on, more and more swamp creatures and frogs start appearing, and the characters complain about the constant croaking and how they can't sleep at night. One family member casually suggests that they pour oil all over the water to choke them off. Although that suggestion sounds outrageous to us now, it makes you wonder how common these occurrences were before there were actually regulations in place. The grandfather makes the comment, "With all of our technology and with all my money, we still can't get rid of these frogs." There are plenty of crazy comments like these, and how the new anti-pollution government regulations are cutting the dividends and yada yada. The grandfather's office is covered in taxidermy animals to top it off. They really wanted you to get the idea that he thinks that he is above animals. He even says, "I believe man is still the master of the world," to which Sam Elliott replies, "Does that mean he can't live in harmony with the rest of it? And what if nature were just trying to get back at us?" Their conversation really sets up the rest of the movie, where characters begin to disappear into the swamp and die off one by one due to the animals taking back control. This movie has a really clear message to watchers in the 70s about pollution and its impact, both on animals and turning it back onto us. The next movie that I mentioned before was The Bay. This film has similar themes to Frogs, but is set in 2012 and focuses on a small bay community in Maryland through a found footage style horror film. Before I go into more detail, I do want to provide a trigger warning. This film is not for the faint of hearted, and there is a lot of body horror and bugs, so if those things gross you out, you may want to skip ahead. Moving on. This premise is that all of the news footage in the movie was held back by the government in an attempt to protect the peace of the public, rather than letting them know the truth about what happened in the bay. The setting is the 4th of July, just like in Frogs, where everyone is enjoying the water, swimming in it, drinking it, watering their lawns with it, and so on. As the movie goes on, we find that there is a massive chicken plant nearby that is practically dumping chicken excrement into the bay. While that sounds bad enough, it is also paired with all of the toxic steroids and growth hormones that get pumped into commercial chickens on the regular. The town mayor boasts about their massive desalination plant that turns brackish water of the bay into drinking water, but he says nothing about filtering out any of the other bad stuff. However, things start going south when 2 oceanographers are found dead after a diving expedition, mysteriously looking like they got eaten from the inside out. As the plot progresses, more and more people in the town are starting to get inexplicable rashes and sores, feeling like something is crawling in their stomach. Turns out, there are parasites that have been feeding and mutating off the toxic bay water, actually crawling around in their stomachs, and then eating their ways out. Definitely do not watch this movie if you get queasy easily. What I really love about movies like these, eco-horror specifically, is that it combines real-world science, most of the time, with horror fiction, which are 2 of my favorite genres. These parasites are actually based on real parasites that do the same thing but to fish. They are so freaky but so cool. They eat the fish's tongue and replace it. Anyways, these critters can cause pretty much the entire town to die off, with the exception of the person from out of town with the footage from her newscast. This story, like the others I've talked about, paint a pretty strong message about pollution is bad, animals don't like it, and they will get you. With both the bay and frogs, we are seeing 2 perspectives from different times on human interference on an ecosystem. Even though our government regulations are trying to prevent pollution a bit more than they did in the 70s, we are still seeing the impacts through creative media, arguably stronger than ever, as we are seeing stronger impacts of pollution and climate change each and every year. Although these 2 movies focused on the animal section of this chapter, these themes persist over the plant and fungi kingdoms as well, especially in more modern films. Plants. In general, plants typically symbolize life and growth, with blooming flowers and fields of endless green grass. The eco-horror genre's take on plants likes to flip the switch and make them the monster. What we humans once recognized as life now means death. A few movies with these themes include 2008's The Ruins, where carnivorous vines target tourists, Stephen King's In the Tall Grass movie from 2019, and maybe you could even classify Little Shop of Horrors as an eco-horror. Although Audrey 2 is an alien, technically, I won't go into the details. For my plant subchapter, I'm going to briefly go over 1972's Silent Running and 2008's The Happening. Silent Running is not a film that I would necessarily say is eco-horror per se, but rather a film that uses capitalism and plants as a reason to make a sci-fi movie. This film is set in space, where an American Airlines cargo ship is flying the last plants to exist after the exploitation of Earth killed off all the other plant life. The main character is the gardener of the ship, while the other crewmen can't seem to care less about the plants. They get an order from their company to destroy the plant domes and return to the company as cargo ships again. But the gardener does not agree with their plans. He finds a way to murder the rest of the crew so that they won't terminate the last plants, and in doing so is left alone to drift in space with his robot colleagues and their plants. The story progresses as he slightly goes insane from being alone in space, talking to speechless robots and programming them to play games with him. As he realizes another cargo ship is trying to make contact after the loss of his crew, he decides to program one of his robots to take care of the plants by itself as he self-detonates his own ship, leaving the last plants to drift endlessly into space. Like I said, this film uses climate change and the exploitation of natural resources on Earth to set up the dichotomy between life and death with plants and humans. One of the quotes that resonated with me, however, was the main character telling his crewmates that everywhere on Earth is 75 degrees, and everyone is the same. I want to live in a world where there is beauty and life. This quote reminds me of how our world looks today, with things like cookie-cutter neighborhoods and the lasting nuclear families, and how important diversity in life is to a meaningful existence. When we fast forwards to 2008, The Happening brings out a bit more of the horror and eco-horror this time. In this film, an epidemic of mysterious suicides is wrought upon the East Coast. At first, we are led to believe that there might be some sort of terrorist operation, poisoning the air and removing the survival instincts in people's brains. But the attacks seem to be focused specifically around lots of people in parks. The story follows a high school science teacher, Mark Wahlberg, and his family and friends as they flee from the city in hopes of escaping an ill fate. Along their journey, they meet a slightly creepy couple who owns a plant nursery who believe that plants are causing the massacre. As it turns out, plants in the area have started responding to human pollution and mistreatment and have developed a solution to the problems. When plants detect a large group of people, they release the neurotoxins that make you kill yourself in whatever way you can find first. Turning on the news, they find that this phenomenon has only been affecting the East Coast, and that they predict it will be over soon. They were able to predict this by finding patterns and correlating it to something like a red tide, which are harmful algal blooms that can be caused from excess nutrient runoff from things like fertilizer or sewage, temperature changes, or salinity changes. The end of the movie has a short commentary between a scientist and an interviewer about what happened, and if it will happen again. Red tides are extremely dangerous to sea life, and this event just happened to evolve to land. The message from the scientist was to take these horrifying events as a warning for how we are treating our planet in the future, or this could become a worldwide issue. Unfortunately, as life on the East Coast returned to a new normal, the final scene of the movie shows a toxin starting to affect some people in Paris. To be continued, but not with that 17% Rotten Tomatoes score. Although this is not the best movie that I've ever seen, I do think that it has some interesting premises and that they set up the foreshadowing well. They use lots of shots of things like car exhaust spewing over plants, a creaking rope swing on a tree, and they even used a lawnmower as a form of execution to show how humans have been mistreating nature and plants that led them to this mess in the first place. As for the plant subgenre, I would love to see if there are other movies with similar themes that are out there. As for the difference between the 70s and the slightly more modern 2008, I would have liked to find two films that were more directly correlated to each other. But as the nature of my project, that is just what I might have expected when trying to compare something new and old. However, like always, we are still seeing the strong nature fighting back idea with all of these eco-horror movies. And now I'm going to dive into the last category of this chapter, fungi. Fungi or mushrooms seem to have burst into popularity more recently, and in some cases, not in a good way. In general, fungi have never had the greatest connotations, as people typically associate it with mold, rot, or death. There have been a few movies in the eco-horror genre that address fungi's role on Earth, starting in the 60s with Matango, a film about mushrooms that turn people into mushroom people when eaten, and more recently, the super popular hit The Last of Us. The Last of Us started out as a video game that quickly gained fame and in 2023 was released as a TV show adaptation. In this game/show, a zombie apocalypse has broken out due to a strain of cordyceps. Cordyceps is a real-world fungus that actually infects a host, although in the real world it's bugs, not humans, and it puppets it for its own survival. Science is so cool! In The Last of Us, it is revealed that cordyceps was able to make the jump from insects to humans due to evolving to fit in with rising global temperatures, as humans have a much warmer body temperature than insects do. Although The Last of Us gained global popularity, I want to focus more on the lesser-known film called The Girl with All the Gifts. This film was based off of a book from 2013 and came out in 2016, and has very similar details as The Last of Us. Both stories include a cordyceps zombie apocalypse and a young immune girl trying to navigate her world. However, The Girl with All the Gifts focuses more on humanity's actions and why some people matter over others. This film focuses on Melanie, a young girl who is half zombie, or hungry as they call it in the film, and is still fully capable of human emotion and thought, yet still eats living flesh. She is among a batch of other similar children who are being tested on and treated like animals, except when they are getting school lessons from their loving teacher. When the Hungries breach the military base that they're being kept in, she escapes with her teacher and the surgeon who is trying to cut into her brain. This film bounces back and forth between the two characters and makes the audience think about what humanity means and how you would react if you were put in this situation. As they work their way across an overgrown field in London to make it to another military base, they discover that the Hungries have started to show traits of their past human selves, but they have also started their next phase of infection. Pods of spores that released when exposed to heat or moisture. They also discover a different band of children who are half hungry, half human, like Melanie, but have grown up by themselves. This group represents a primitive human who only communicate through grunts and follow an alpha child as their leader. The climax of the movie comes when Melanie decides to take her kind's fate into her own hands after finally seeing the real world for the first time. She traps her teacher in an airtight mobile lab as she goes to light up a tower of spore pods, and on the way, the scientist is killed by the pack of children. By lighting up the spores, Melanie set off a chain reaction that would doom the whole world if they hadn't already been infected. The end scene shows Melanie with her fellow children taking lessons outside, while their teacher is locked up in the lab, reversing the roles that were there in the beginning. This film has a lot of commentary on how we treat each other in society, and about who is deemed more or less human and worthy of living. When I first watched it a few years ago, I was on the scientist side, thinking only about how logistically the human race could be saved. After the ending, however, it makes you think about when it is time to give up our control on the planet and give it back to nature. The human race had a good fight, but in this case, the characters needed to accept that humanity has evolved into a new form, and that we are not at the top of the food chain anymore. Okay, but how does this relate to climate change? And my answer is a bit more of an interpretation compared to the other more obvious films that I've talked about. The spore pods in the movie could have only been released by extreme heat and water, like I mentioned before. Naturally, those things don't happen without interference, like Melanie setting them on fire. My hypothesis is that since rising heat, floods, and extreme weather are caused by global warming, humanity was already on its way to their own death through changing the climate. When the hungry epidemic started, however, things like carbon emissions dropped, and the global events that would have opened the pods didn't actually happen. In a way, we are putting humans back into an ecosystem with their new counterparts, and are each part of a web that shifts with change rather than sitting unaffected at the top of the pyramid. Another take on this movie involves taking the zombies as a metaphor for pre-apocalypse human behavior. In Scott Hamilton's essay, The Girl with All the Gifts, Eco-Zombieism and the Anthropocalypse and Critical Lucidity, he mentions how, quote, eco-zombieism is, in part, a state of environmental crisis for which Earth's retaliation on humans matches the mindless consumption and desolation of ecological resources by humans. In his essay, he talks about this mindless consumption of our natural resource as humans, and how this compares to any eco-horror film that I have mentioned about zombies and their own mindless consumption. Overall, I truly think that this is a great movie and would recommend it to anyone. Who isn't afraid of zombies? For my next chapter, we will be honing in on some movies that specifically address climate change and how our overconsumption has impacted these worlds. Chapter 5. Hot and Cold. As time goes on, more and more films have begun to address climate change as something inevitable, and they focus their attention on how that impacts greater society across the world. These interpretations often are taking place in the future and deal with weather conditions in a direct correlation to the climate, in fact, changing. I will be specifically focusing on two films with these themes, 1972's Soylent Green and 2004's The Day After Tomorrow. In my last chapter, I will also wanted to note a few honorable mentions that I also watched along my Capstone journey. These include 2021's The Tomorrow War, where global warming melts ice that had previously held alien invaders from ravaging Earth, and 2013's Snowpiercer, where the government dispersed a chemical in the atmosphere to counteract global warming, but instead created the next ice age, which killed off everyone except those on a cyclical train track that is an obvious metaphor for class systems and capitalism. Another film includes Geostorm, a 2017 film about weather-controlling satellite that was first created to offset climate change, but falls under government corruption to create mass weather events that eliminate government competition. And finally, 2021's Don't Look Up, which is one of the most obvious and topical films that I've ever seen about the metaphor for climate change when a meteor threatens to wipe out Earth, and scientists trying to warn the world are shut down and ridiculed by the public and the US administration. When I was watching this film, my jaw was on the floor the entire way through. It was like seeing a real-time documentary. All of these films addressed climate change as a catalyst for the plot, still with the strong themes of capitalism ever present. To narrow it down again to two movies, Soylent Green and The Day After Tomorrow tell us two different tales about societal and global climate. Soylent Green, again made in 1973, takes place in the future of 2022, where global warming and overconsumption of natural resources leave society worse for wear. New York City and the rest of the world now struggle with overpopulation and a lack of food to feed everyone, paired with the extreme heat that comes with the greenhouse effect. Soylent, which nowadays is a meal replacement powder made of soy and lentils, is rationed out to the people as their primary food source, where real food like fruits, vegetables, and meats are reserved for the uber-rich who can afford these rare products. Soylent Green is advertised as being resourced from ocean phytoplankton to reduce hunger of the masses. The story follows the main character, a detective for the NYPD, who is following the assassination of a Soylent Company board member. After some exposition, some further research is done into the oceanographic reports from previous years, showing that phytoplankton, along with all other life, has also been dying off, and cannot have been used to make Soylent. The main characters find out that Soylent Green is being made out of the overwhelming amount of human bodies from all of the overpopulation. Upon this new discovery, the detective's elderly roommate decides to go to the government clinic for assisted suicide to peacefully leave this dystopian world. As he is dying, clips of beautiful nature, plants, and animals and scenery play as a distant memory of what Earth once had. After his passing, the detective follows where they take the body to investigate Soylent himself, where he finds the unfortunate truth that Soylent Green is people. I'll just let him tell you.
Listen to me, Hatcher. You gotta tell him Soylent Green is people! We gotta stop him somehow!
Paired with dramatic acting, this film teaches us a lot about this dystopian future after global warming has taken over, and demonstrates this with themes involving government and capital corruption, anti-feminism, and sci-fi. The moral of this story is to take action before this happens, before eating people is the next best solution. In Teresa O'Connor's essay, Eco-Cinema mirrors societal fears on climate change and is an accessible medium for encouraging education and audience behavior change. They comment on the euthanasia clinic scene with nature imagery, showing that, quote, the film demonstrates how utilizing eco-nostalgia can affect viewers as it lets them reflect on a world that is still within their reach. This movie has us reflecting on a past with a beautiful life in nature as a nostalgia, all while this is still within our reach. It is important to take this message seriously, to preserve and protect what we have now before it's gone. Now, to shift gears a bit to 2004, The Day After Tomorrow is set in a fictional near future in which the drastic events of climate change all happen over the course of a few days. This movie starts off with some field scientists extracting ice cores when a massive rift splits the ice shelf in two. Afterwards, one of the scientists, the main character, gives a talk to the United Nations about his climate change research and warns the leaders about a fast approaching climate shift that could be devastating. Unfortunately, his claims are dismissed by the US Vice President as precautionary measures would be too expensive. However, all too quickly, his predictions come true as freak weather and storms begin to affect different areas of the world, with the most notable being plummeting temperatures in the northern regions. The real conflict arises when the scientist's son gets trapped in New York City with his friends due to the immense flooding, followed by the sudden deadly freeze of the upper half of the hemisphere. Having prior experience with Arctic expeditions, the father sets out across the frozen country to make it to his son, to prove that there is still life to be rescued amid the wasteland. In the end, the storms subside long enough for rescue missions to evacuate what was left of the city, and the world is now in a new ice age. This story is one, not just of climate change, but a commentary on how our government responds to disaster and its people. This film came out in 2004, just a year before the catastrophic Hurricane Katrina ravaged the southern US, and its message was only proven clear based on the response to this tragedy. In the film, as the events start to unfold more and more, a national broadcast was made by the government for citizens in the south of the US to start migrating into Mexico for protection from the elements, and for people who were already in the north to try to stay warm and find shelter, as if that would be enough. Even though there was a warning from the scientists in the beginning, hesitation to act as a government due to projected expenses caused millions of people their lives. 2 years after this film, and 1 year after Hurricane Katrina, Vice President Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, came out about the dark tunnel we are currently barreling down as a planet. This documentary highlights all of the aspects of where our climate stood in 2006 and where it was projected to turn to if we, as a society, didn't take immediate action to undo what our forebears did. One notable aspect of The Day After Tomorrow is the B-plot of the son and his friends surviving in New York. These teenagers were visiting the city for an academic decathlon when they were trapped and struggling to survive. The subplot stands as a metaphor for how, again, each new generation is carrying out the debt from their parents and their parents' parents over and over again, because that initial debt to our planet is enormous. The younger generations are left to pick up the broken pieces of the world to try to fix it so that we can even continue to have new generations in the future. Overall, I think this film puts a lot of things into perspective around the US government, climate change, and the correlation between the two. Chapter 6. Conclusion. Throughout my research on all of these different films, I have found lots of interesting themes and ideas surrounding eco-horror, disaster, and climate change. Viewing movies from around the 70s, I found it really intriguing to see how films took pollution, global warming, and environmental impact into consideration as they were making these productions. As we move forward in time, not only did the quality of production go up, but so did the details and the information provided about the scientific aspects of how our world would and is changing due to our effects on nature. As O'Connor puts it, these dystopian films, with their provocative environmental themes, reflect the society for when they were made and illuminate societal issues, as well as looking at how audiences can be impacted to take action around contentious environmental issues and hopefully provoking action. End quote. Like I said in the beginning, I hope that by making and watching these films, we as a society become more concerned for our environment and how we are treating it, especially now more than ever. To finally conclude, more than anything, this was a passion project, and I really enjoyed learning more about our world through film and how it is viewed over time through this media. In the future, I wonder how the eco-horror genre will shift to model new obstacles, but with hope, we won't have to see that day. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that you enjoyed.